It was just before 4 in the afternoon. Trevor Parker had been at the yard earlier that day. He had walked past the same heap of coal twice before lunch, and there had been nothing really going on with it. It was just coal. Just the ordinary, unremarkable contents of a working coal yard, which is probably what your parents say about you, in a quiet northern English town. Actually, I'm just joking with you. I'm sure your parents are very impressed with you. Anyways, but now there was something else. He stopped walking. He stood very still for a moment, the way a person does when their brain is refusing to accept what their eyes are telling them. Then he got closer. Lying on top of the heap, 15 feet up, face pointing at the sky, was a man, and he wasn't moving. His clothes were neat, sitting on a pile of black coal in the middle of a working yard, and his shoes were clean. His jacket was buttoned. His expression, even from the ground, was wrong. Not peaceful, not the expression of someone who had fallen and not gotten back up, who was also wearing a suit and nice shoes. The face was contorted. The eyes were wide open. Trevor Parker had never seen a dead body before. He would later say it took him several seconds before he could make himself move. Then he went inside and called the police. He didn't know it yet, but what was sitting on top of that coal heap would spend the next 44 years refusing to be explained. Long before this case shocked the nation, Yorkshire, which is apparently a place that had a witch at one point, was going through difficult times once more. By 1980, many communities had already been feeling the strain. Also, I covered the Yorkshire witch. It wasn't a good year. It wasn't a good decade. The coal industry that entire community had been built around was shrinking, and everyone could feel it. Strikes, unemployment, the quiet creeping fear of a way of life being pulled out from underneath you without any warning. For men who had spent their working lives underground, men like the one who would end up at the top of the coal heap, the future was uncertain in ways that were deeply personal and not political. And then there was the Ripper. From 1975 to 1980, a man named Peter Sutcliffe murdered 13 women across West Yorkshire and Greater Manchester. He attacked more. He was never where the police expected him to be. They interviewed him multiple times and let him go. He was out there still in the summer of 1980, still unidentified, still walking through the same streets as everyone else. West Yorkshire police were kind of stretched, exhausted, under fire from all sides for a manhunt that would become one of the most criticized investigations in British history. Trust in the authorities was not high, and underlying all of this, unseen, persistent, nearly impossible to fully convey issue was the Cold War. Essentially, not cash money times. Britain was a frontline NATO state. American military bases sat on English soil, which is one of the greatest reversals we've ever pulled in American history. The Soviet Union was real, and the people in government knew it. The anxiety didn't always show up in the ordinary conversations, but it was there in how people looked at the sky and how quickly a strange light or unusual noise could make somebody's pulse climb. UFO reports across the UK have been rising through the 70s. Something about the specific intersection of paranoia, government secrets, enemy technology, things in the sky that nobody was explaining, and really was producing more and more issues for people as more came forward saying, I saw something I cannot account for. And Yorkshire was one of the key centers. Specifically, a small mill town in the Pennies called Todmorden, sitting at the borders between, and you know what? I'm gonna do a solid for the British here. West Yorkshire and Lancashire, because it's not Shire for some reason. They don't know how to say their words. Population around 15,000. All terraced houses and cobblestone and Victorian mill buildings that hadn't changed much in about 50 years. By some accounts, the town and its surrounding moorland were responsible for a disproportionate share of the country's total UFO reports. People here were more than 10 times likely to report an unidentified aerial sighting than the average British resident. Whether you believe that means something was actually there, or whether it simply says something about the social psychology of a region living under pressure, constant pressure, that's a question we'll come back to. But for now, just hold that in mind, that this thing was an absolute powder keg of paranoia. Which, you know, you never know about the Soviets to begin with. Now we know that it's okay, but back then you really didn't. Because all roads pointed to Todmorden, the coal yard was there. The body was found there, and 5 months later, a police officer would experience something there that would change his life forever. His name was Zigmund Adamski. He went by Ziggy to the people who knew him, which is what I'm going to refer to him as well. He was a 56-year-old, a Polish-born coal miner who had come to England and after the Second War had built a quiet life in a village called Tingley. Also remember the Polish people, you slam your face against a keyboard and that becomes your name. Anyways, this village was about 25 miles east of Todmorden near Wakefield. He had married his wife Lecadia Everyone called her Lottie, which I will be doing that as well in 1951. They had decades together in that house and the same community. He worked at Loft House Colliery, and by 1980, after years on the ground, his lungs were suffering from it. He was seeking early retirement, and if you don't know what he was suffering from, it's essentially called black lung. It's when coal dust is inhaled. It's not great, and if you want to see a full thing on it, go watch Zoolander. People knew him and described him as the same way every single time. Quiet, dependable, private, not unfriendly, but a man who kept his world small and orderly. There was nothing complicated about Ziggy. He had neither debts nor enemies. There was no history of mental illness, unexplained absences, or erratic behavior. By every account, he was exactly what he appeared to be, an aging, unwell, decent man preparing to slow down. The Friday before he vanished, he had been in a relatively good mood. His goddaughter was getting married the next day. Relatives had flown in from Poland for it. He prepared his speech. He was looking forward to it. The particular quiet joy of a man who doesn't need much, so he had been given something worth celebrating. He left home at around 3:30 on the afternoon of June 6th, 1980. He told Lottie that he was going to the local shop to buy potatoes. He took nothing with him, no bag, no change of clothes, no passport, because why would he need it? Just whatever was in his pockets and however much cash a man needs to buy potatoes from a shop a short walk from his front door. The shopkeeper remembers seeing him, in and out. He bought what he needed and then left. And then Ziggy ceased to exist in every verifiable record for the next 5 days. Think about that for a moment. A man in his mid-50s and declining help with no reason to run, no reason to hide, no known enemies, no luggage, walks out of a shop in small Yorkshire village, and then disappears. He doesn't come home that night, nor does he contact Lottie. By the following morning, he had failed to appear at the wedding, and that's not good because he had been preparing for that. A wedding family members had literally traveled across Europe to attend. There was no phone call, no message. He just simply wasn't there. A missing person report would then be filed. Police followed every lead that they could find, but the case quickly stalls. The days turn into nearly a week, and still there is no trace of him. Investigators found no record of him using bank accounts, no credible reports placing him anywhere, and no clues that could help to determine where he may have even gone. 25 miles of West Yorkshire and surrounding areas, and nobody had seen Ziggy anywhere. Then, June 11th, Trevor Parker sees the body on a local coal heap at 3:45 in the afternoon. Police are called. Officers Malcolm Hagley and Alan Godfrey are dispatched from the local station. When they hear a body has been found, their minds go to the same place every officer's mind went to in West Yorkshire in 1980, the Ripper. But the victim is male, and when they arrive at the scene, it becomes clear almost immediately that this is something else entirely. Hagley tries to climb the coal heap first. It's not easy. The coal shifts and slides underfoot. He goes down multiple times, coating his uniform black, before he finally pulls himself to the top. And remember, that's relatively important. It's hard to climb. He calls down to Godfrey and tells him to come up. He needs to see this. The man was in his mid-50s. He was wearing a suit jacket and trousers, but no shirt, just a string vest underneath that jacket. His watch and wallet were missing. He still had his shoes and socks on, but something about them looked relatively wrong, as though they had been put on in a hurry or by someone who did not quite understand how a person wears shoes. More striking was the condition of his clothes. They were spotless, not merely clean, but completely free of the dirt, dust, or grime, sort of like the stuff that just got on the officer trying to climb up there. And sitting on top of a black coal heap in a working yard, his suit was clean, his shoes were sparkling, and there wasn't a single smear of coal dust anywhere on his body. The detail stopped both officers. Hagley had practically demolished his own uniform just climbing to reach the body. The heap was loose, unstable, coated in that fine black powder that sticks to everything, including the inside of your lungs. How a body, alive or dead, could be on top of this heap without a trace of dust was the question that nobody could answer. There were no drag marks on the coal, no footprints, no disturbances to the surface on that heap at all. It looked as though the man had been lowered onto it from above. His hair had been cut recently, a short crop, recently trimmed, but family would later confirm that when he left his home on June 6th, he had longer, messier, his hair was messier than this. Someone had cut it during the 5 days that he was missing. His facial stubble was approximately 1 day's growth, meaning he had shaved or been shaved himself within 24 hours before his death. His hands had small scrapes on them, no major injuries, nothing that looked like the result of a struggle. But on the back of his neck and head, a series of dark oval burns. They were not fresh, they were days old. Someone had treated them. A yellow-green gel-like ointment had been applied to the wounds at some point during the missing period. When Ziggy was still alive, the samples from that ointment were then sent to state forensic laboratories in Weatherby, tested by professionals with access to every pharmaceutical compound, every industrial substance, every entry in the National Forensic Database, and they couldn't identify it. There was no match, not in the records they checked, nor in the database available to them. The substance that had been applied to a dead man's burns by someone or something during 5 days that no one could account for remained completely unknown. Alan Godfrey had seen dead bodies before, and he would see many more over the course of his career, but this was the one that stayed with him. He would say it years later and decades after that. It wasn't just impossible for placement, or the spotless clothes, or the unidentified substance on the wounds. It was the face. Eyes open, mouth twisted, the expression of a man who had, in his final moments of his life, seen something that produced a terror in him so complete, so total, that had frozen itself into his features post-mortem. Alan Godfrey would later say that the man looked like he had been frightened to death. Ziggy, the police confirmed, was the man from Tingley. The missing person report had been basically, concluded. The coal miner, who had gone to buy potatoes 5 days ago and never came home, identified and explained not even a little bit. The post-mortem was conducted by consultant pathologist Dr. Alan Edwards, because everybody's named Alan around here. The medical cause of death was established as ischemic heart disease, a heart attack, compounded by the emphysema that years of mining work had already left in Ziggy's lungs. Cardiac arrest explained how he died. It explained almost nothing else. Coroner James Turnbull, who I'm surprised isn't named Alan, who presided over the inquest, recorded an open verdict. That is a specific legal finding. It means this person died, and we know how they died, but we cannot establish the circumstances, location, or the manner in which they came to be where they were found. Turnbull went further than that. He said that his biggest mystery in his entire life was specifically this case. Nothing else matched in his career. A man who had made a profession from navigating the most unexplained and tragic ends of human life was telling the press in plain language that he had never encountered anything like this before. And then he said the thing that launched 1,000 conversations and hasn't stopped yet. He said that if someone told him this man had been dropped onto that coal heap by a UFO, it would only raise maybe one eyebrow. Whether he meant it literally as a genuine suggestion, or whether it was a darkly tired acknowledgement of how thoroughly inexplicable the whole situation was, nobody can really say for certain. What is certain is that a serving coroner said it, that the ointment applied to his burns remained unidentified, and that no one could really explain the placement of the body, even in the slightest. No arrest was ever made, no suspect was ever named, and no one ever came forward to account for the 5 missing days. Lottie took her husband's body back to Poland for burial. By available accounts, she never returned to England. The case was formally closed, with nothing ever resolved. But then, 5 months later, November 28th, 1980, Alan Godfrey was back on nights. The shift had been unremarkable, the kind of quiet that makes time feel thick and slow. Then the calls started coming in. A herd of cows had been spotted roaming through a residential street near the town. Not the call you'd expect on a night shift, but also not impossible. Fences break all the time, and cows, well, actually, they're kind of ornery. Cows get out. Godfrey drove through Todmorden looking for them, then found nothing. Came back, and then an elderly woman phoned in. She said the cows had been in her garden, blocking the road out front. The operator asked if they were still there. There was a pause, and she said, no. The operator asked, well, which direction did they go? The woman hesitated. Why you would hesitate to tell? Where did they go? She said she'd seen a bright flash of light, and then the cows were just simply gone. Oh, maybe that's why. So they went up. More calls came through the night, and as the shift neared its end, around 5 in the morning, Godfrey agreed to do one final sweep before heading in. It had been raining, the roads were wet and empty. He turned onto Burnley Road, which runs out of Todmorden, and into the open moorland, a long exposed stretch of tarmac with nothing more on either side than, grass after the last houses drop away. He wasn't heading anywhere specific, just sort of looking, making one last pass before calling it a night. Then he saw a light on the road ahead. He thought maybe it was just a bus. The first mill workers' shifts started early. Buses came through before dawn. As he drove towards it, about 20 yards away, he stopped. This was not a bus. Hovering around 5 feet above the road's surface, not resting on it, hovering over it, was a large, dark, diamond-shaped object, around 20 feet wide, 14 to 20 feet high, rotating slowly anti-clockwise without a sound. Godfrey sat in his car and looked at it, probably like we would all do. In the space between the object and the road, in that 5-foot gap, leaves and branches from nearby trees were also spinning with it, but they were spinning in the opposite direction of the object, clockwise, while the object turned anti-clockwise. The physics of it made no sense. The air below that thing was moving against it, creating a visible contradiction that Godfrey would describe with precision in every account he gave afterwards. The object made no sound that he could hear. He felt no vibrations through the car seat. It was enormous and silent and absolutely wrong. He reached for his radio, but was met with nothing but static. Switching to the more powerful car radio really made no difference. He was alone on an empty road at 5 in the morning with no way to reach anyone, 20 yards away from something he had no category for, and it looked creepy. He did what police officers of that era were trained to do, shoot it immediately. No, he didn't. He was trained to do what, the scene of a traffic incident, basically. He picked up a clipboard from the passenger seat and began drawing, recording dimensions and details while there was still something to record. He was still working when he heard the sound. Deep, sudden, a heavy whoosh that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then, everything went white. Just a fraction of a second, a flash of total obliterating white. And then Alan Godfrey was driving down Burnley Road. He wasn't standing beside his car anymore. He was moving, about 1,500 yards from where he had parked, heading in the opposite direction with no memory of turning the vehicle around, setting off, or anything that happened between the white flash and this moment. He then hit the brakes, because, we would all be a little confused. Looking in the mirror, he saw that stretch of road where the object had been sitting was empty, dark, and nothing was there. He glanced at his watch. 30 minutes of his life were now gone. He was certain, completely certain, that no more than 2 minutes had passed while he sat watching the object. But his watch said 30 minutes. Half an hour, unaccounted for, gone from his life without a trace, which is pretty standard in these events. Godfrey didn't go straight to the station. He drove until he found another officer on foot patrol, and he brought him back to the site. He was already thinking about what had happened when he told his story. He needed a witness for what came next, even if the object itself was gone. At the location, branches and leaves scattered across the road in a pattern that made no meteorological sense. The rain that night had been light and constant, not a storm, not a gust. There was no reason for the debris from nearby trees to spread across that tarmac in the way that it was. And in the center of the road, exactly where the object had been hovering, a circular patch of ground, approximately 20 feet across, was completely dry. Not slightly drier than its surroundings, not sheltered by an overhang. Bone dry, in the middle of a rain-soaked tarmac, in a neat circle. The second officer was skeptical, as we all might be, but then he saw the dry patch. They looked at the park next to the road. The gates were locked. On a hunch, they climbed the fence and then went inside. On the rugby field, in the middle of the locked park, standing calmly in the dark, were the herd of cows. There was no obvious way they could have gotten there. The gates were locked. The fences were intact and too high for cows to jump over the moon, yet somehow they were there. The following morning, Godfrey filed his report. Before the week was out, someone at the station had leaked it to the local newspaper. From that point on, it became something entirely different. Once Godfrey's account was in print, other people recognized what he was describing. A bus driver who had taken the vehicle out on the early morning route that same day, down the same stretch of Burnley Road, said he encountered the road debris, essentially, the scattered branches and leaves. He had seen the dry circular patch in the center of the wet tarmac. He stood on it, and he felt something that he hadn't been able to explain at the time. Air moving upward from the ground. Not wind, not a draft from maybe passing traffic, but air rising steadily from the road surface to approximately neck height. He had thought it strange at the time, got back on his bus, and then carried on with his route. It was only later, after reading Godfrey's account, that he understood what he might have seen. A school caretaker opening the building in pre-dawn dark had seen a light down in the valley below, the same valley, the same stretch of road, which is obviously a little concerning. He watched it travel at a speed from one end of the valley to the other and back again about 4 times before it accelerated straight upward into the sky and was gone. And then the police officers. A group of officers had been searching the moors that night for a stolen motorcycle. The exact number varies by account. Some say 3, others say 5. They spotted something that caught their eye because they initially thought it just might be a headlight of the bike that they were hunting. It was blue and it was floating above the tree line of a nearby forest, moving slowly before it suddenly shot away at a speed that ruled out any vehicle that they knew. So probably, unless it's like Harry Potter on that bike, I don't know. They never really identified what it was. These were not fringe witnesses. These were people with jobs, routines, professional obligations to basically have accurate observations. The bus driver, the caretaker, the serving officers, none of them had any reason to just straight up invent this, and none of them had any contact with Godfrey before they came forward. The dry patch alone, independently reported by Godfrey and the bus driver, does carry evidentiary weight. Neither man had coordinated with the other, yet both describe the exact same anomaly. What this signifies is another matter entirely, but it points to one unavoidable conclusion. Something had been there. UFO investigators had already been circling the Godfrey case when they persuaded him to undergo hypnotic regression, which, not really great, with 2 qualified psychiatrists. The aim was to see if the missing 30 minutes could be recovered. The sessions took place 3 times, all were filmed. Godfrey stated he had no conscious memory of what he said to them, and the recordings were later played back to him, because he was probably curious. On the tape, he begins calmly describing the light ahead, saying he thinks it's a bus bringing mill workers to an early shift. Then his voice changes. His hands come up to his face, and he starts screaming. When the screaming stops, he says he is inside of the object. The walls are white. The light comes from nowhere specific. He describes a figure, tall, bearded, dressed in long robes, wearing something like a skull cap. He calls himself Yosef. Alongside Yosef are smaller entities, roughly child-size, large dark eyes, heads that taper to a point. He can't describe whether they are creatures or machines. He calls them both the same thing at different points. They put him on a table, he resists, they proceed anyways, stay strapped or get clapped. And then the detail that catches people every time they hear this account, he turns around and sees a large black dog sitting in the room, watching him. He can't explain the dog, he never could. This is the critical point, and it cannot be overstated. Hypnotic regression is not considered a reliable method for recovering accurate memories. And I do want to just point out, the black dog, it's kind of a thing all throughout human history to be worried about, which kind of is interesting here. But that is not a matter of opinion as far as regression is concerned. It is the conclusion that has been reached by decades of psychological research. Studies consistently show that hypnosis does not improve memory accuracy and actively increases the risk of generating vivid, detailed, and completely false memories, particularly when combined with suggestive questioning. The work of memory researcher Elizabeth Loftus at the University of Washington demonstrated that people can be induced to form detailed recollections of events that never occurred. Godfrey himself acknowledged this. He publicly distinguished between his conviction about the sighting, which he has never doubted, and his uncertainty about the content of regression sessions. He said it was probably a dream or something his mind constructed from what he read about UFO abductions. He never claimed certainty about the hypnosis produced. That distinction is, though, very important. It keeps the credible part credible. The sighting of physical corroboration. The abduction narrative kind of does not. They are not the same claim, just so you're aware. Shortly after Godfrey's story became public, he received a letter. And not just any letter. This letter had been sent from Moscow, which are famously super fun-time friends with NATO at this point. The sender identified himself as Professor Zakharov. The letter asked for information about Godfrey's sighting, and notably about a similar event somewhere in southern England. Freedom of Information requests submitted to the UK National Archives found no records confirming this letter in any official capacity. Its existence rests on Godfrey's account, and it's also from the Russians, so why would they keep track of that? Well, I guess they would want to keep track of that. But his superiors did not dismiss it. They instructed him to write back. They asked to see every reply that he received, and then Godfrey was called into his chief inspector's office. There was a man in the room Godfrey did not recognize, dressed in plain clothes and showing little expression, with a thick file laid out on the table in front of him. When Godfrey asked who he was, the man said, "All you need to know is that I am a man from the ministry." The Ministry. Oh, the Ministry of Defense. He opened the file. Godfrey could see his own sketch of the object inside, the drawing he had made on the clipboard during the encounter itself. Whatever this man's file was, it contained Godfrey's work. The instructions left no room for ambiguity. Godfrey was told to stop speaking to the media, to stop discussing the object that he had reported, and to stop talking about Ziggy. Which, if you remember, Ziggy is the guy they found in the coal pile. I know this took like a total left turn. The focus was not solely on the UFO sighting. Adamski's case was included as well. The body on the coal heap, the open verdict, and the 5 missing days, as well as the unidentified ointment applied to the burns. Every aspect of the affair was basically to be left alone. The man came back more than once. He appeared at Godfrey's local pub, a message, clearly, that he could be found anywhere he went. Godfrey eventually told him directly and plainly to leave him alone. After a while, the visits did stop. Whether it was because Godfrey was judged not to be a threat or because whoever was managing the situation decided the attention had died down enough is something that is never really fully explained. Freedom of information requests submitted in the years since have been asked of the Ministry of Defense, the Cabinet Office, and the National Archives for any records relating to Godfrey's sightings or its connection to the Adamski case. The responses have returned empty. Whether files existed, if they did, those have not been disclosed because honestly, okay, here's the thing. If it does actually involve aliens, I think up in like the US is now doing it, where there's kind of like, oh, there's red orbs, we don't know what they are. The point is that if anything is like legitimately classified, you can't just request classified documents. They just won't tell you. So that's kind of how that works. It's kind of like, yeah, we'll give you the information that really doesn't matter, or it's not going to affect anybody, or they're not going to tell you, oh, here are the files on a portal gun we built in the 60s. So some accounts suggest Godfrey's original station report was destroyed shortly after national press attention began. The MOD's official position is simply that no such file has been released. Those are not the same statements. Yorkshire police were already in crisis at this point. The Ripper investigation had become a national embarrassment, a case defined by institutional failure, dismissed evidence, and catastrophic misidentification that allowed a known suspect to slip through police hands multiple times. The force did not also need a UFO story attached to one of its officers at that point, because it's like, well, I guess we really need to just fire everybody and restart. Godfrey was eventually reassigned, sidelined, made to feel like a problem rather than a witness. Colleagues mocked him, some openly, some behind his back, which doesn't really matter. I remember before starting YouTube, I'm in a fraternity. I had apparently had guys mocking me. What are they to say now? Anyways, the institutional message, though, was clear. This is an embarrassment, and so are you. He started drinking. At his lowest point, he was getting through a bottle of whiskey a day. His marriage ended. He lost his home. He described ending up in a friend's attic, destitute, with his career and everything built around it gone. He never changed his story, though. That remained true in the later years when scrutiny and pressure were at their greatest. It remained true years later, after he had rebuilt his life, remarried in 1995, and became a recognized figure in discussions of unexplained phenomena. Also, if life is really bad and it really, really sucks, there's a couple things you can turn to. You could turn to the bottle. You could turn to overeating. You could turn to the Lord. You could turn to exercise. I would say if you're not going to turn to the Lord, which is your decision to make in life, turn to exercise. Just go get ripped, right? Lift heavy weights, go for runs, don't turn to the bottle, and don't turn to food. Always remember, at the beginning, the choice is easier to make. You have that choice. Anyways, it always remained true throughout decades of interviews, public appearances, and private conversations, any of which would have provided an opportunity to say maybe you made a mistake, or you know what, maybe I was tired, maybe I misinterpreted something, right? To just kind of take the heat off of him. But he never offered such explanation. Instead, he continued to stand by every major element of the account that he gave in the days that followed the incident. The dimensions of the object, the radio interference, the anti-clockwise rotation, the leaves spinning in the opposite direction, which would be clockwise, the dry circular patch on the ground, and the 30 minutes that he could not account for. For more than 4 decades, those details remained substantially unchanged. That doesn't prove he's right, but it does mean something, especially when the heat's on and you're still sticking by what you said. For more than 4 decades, people have tried to make sense of what happened. Investigators, journalists, skeptics, and believers have all proposed their own explanations. Some focus on the evidence that exists, others focus on the gaps. None have managed to resolve every question that this case presents. The community conflict theory has been one of the more, persistent, non-paranormal explanations, and it holds that a domestic dispute within the Polish immigrant community, possibly connected to visiting relatives and a disagreement about whether Lottie and Ziggy should return to Poland, escalated into a physical abduction, which is a bit strange. This theory suggests he was held for several days, possibly in an outbuilding, sustained the burns accidentally, and then was cared for, and then died of a heart attack induced by the stress of his confinement. In a panic, whoever held him in place then put the body somewhere where it would be found. This was a kind of tragic plausibility for the 5 missing days. A man was held against his will by people who nevertheless fed him and tended to his injuries. It's a bit unusual, but not impossible. The difficulty arrives when the ointment is kind of, brought up. A group of ordinary individuals attempting to manage a crisis would be expected to use whatever medical supplies were readily available over at Walgreens or something. Antiseptic cream, basic first aid treatments, or something taken from a household medicine cabinet. Any of those substances would likely have been identifiable through routine forensic testing. The compound, found on Ziggy's burns, is completely unidentifiable. They don't know what it is. And then you get hit with body placement. If you're a group of people trying to get rid of a problem, you do not deposit it on top of a 15-foot coal heap in a working yard in daylight with no tracks, no marks, no evidence of how you got there. You find somewhere that's not going to be immediately visible. The placement of Ziggy's body is not the behavior of anyone trying to conceal what had happened. It is the behavior of something that, didn't need to use stairs. The fugue state theory is actually similarly partial. Dissociative episodes are real. People in the grip of, an actual fugue state can walk great distances, appear relatively normal to strangers, and have no memory of their movements. But a fugue state does not explain the haircut. It does not explain the burns with an unidentified substance. It does not explain the clean clothes on an undisturbed coal heap because there was no evidence he climbed up there. A man wandering in a fugue state for days does not arrive groomed and spotless at the summit of an industrial heap. The KGB theory gets kind of raised because Poland was behind the Iron Curtain at this time, because the Cold War was very real, and because intelligence activity in immigrant communities was not hypothetical. But Ziggy was a 56-year-old coal miner with lung disease seeking an early retirement. He had no access to sensitive information. Soviet intelligence in 1980 did not have a category for coal miners in Tingley, and if they had wanted him dead, they would not have left him on a coal heap looking frightened. They had way more efficient methods that wouldn't actually tie to them. The UFO theory persists not because it has been proven, but because the competing explanations leave significant portions of the case unresolved, and ironically, the UFO theory actually solves a lot of these. The case is unusual, not because of any single fact, but because of how many unusual facts surround it, such as the missing days, the condition of the body, the burns, or the location where Ziggy was found. So the difficulty is that the case is not built around a single anomaly, it is a collection of anomalies that seem to resist being separated from one another. Taken together, the unexplained ointment, the absence of convincing account for 5 missing days, the lack of any verifiable sightings during that time period, because it's not a big town, he would have been seen, the unusually clean condition of the body, because even if he goes missing in the moors, he's going to be dirty. You don't walk around the moors without getting dirty. And also the recent haircut. Where did he get the haircut then? If nobody remembers seeing him, the treated burns, you would just simply go to a place where they give haircuts and be like, hey, you remember this guy? If nobody does, then he didn't get it around there. So the coroner's uncertainty created a set of circumstances that no conventional explanation has fully reconciled. The coincidence that the officer most closely associated with the investigation would later report an encounter with an unidentified object in the same area only adds to another layer of the story, particularly because aspects of that encounter were independently corroborated by other witnesses and observations. Yet the UFO theory occupies a peculiar position. It has the advantage of accommodating nearly every unexplained feature of the case, but it does so by invoking a cause that remains beyond verification. It offers a framework capable of containing the mystery while providing no reliable means of demonstration that the framework is correct. That is why the theory endures. Not because it answers every question, but because no rival explanation has succeeded in answering it more. There is no physical object, no non-human tissue, no instrument reading that confirms what Godfrey saw was anything other than something unusual that he could not identify. The circumstantial picture is striking, genuinely striking, more so the longer you look at it. But striking is not the same thing as confirmed. So, what is not in dispute is that Ziggy basically left his home in Tingley on June 6, 1980. He was seen for the last time at a local shop. He was found dead 5 days later in Todmorden, 25 miles away, on top of a coal heap he could not have reached by conventional means without leaving evidence that he had ascended it. The official cause of death was a heart attack. Evidence suggested that he had been alive for most of those 5 days that he was missing, during which time he appeared to have been fed and cared for. His wounds had been treated with a substance that forensic scientists were unable to identify. The body was clean, the hair freshly cut, and the expression on his face was one of unmistakable terror. No one has ever been charged in connection with this case, and no one has an explanation to conclusively establish what may have happened. The verdict has been left open and remains so to this day. 5 months later, the police officers who stood over Ziggy's body encountered something on Burnley Road that cost him 30 minutes of his life and everything he had built in the years that followed. Physical evidence of that encounter was confirmed by independent witnesses. The government responded by sending an unidentified official to silence him. His reports were not included in the MOD's public disclosure of UFO files, and his Freedom of Information requests have returned nothing. The ointment has never been identified, the body placement has never been explained, the connection between two inexplicable accounts in the same town involving the same officer as well as the other people who have mentioned things has never been officially addressed. Todmorden remains. The moors are dark at 5 in the morning. Burnley Road runs out of the town into the empty hills, and the streetlights end where the moorland begins. Alan Godfrey has never recanted his account. Ziggy's death remains unexplained, and somewhere, perhaps in a file that has never seen daylight, if such file exists at all, there may be a version of the story that has never reached the public. So at the end here, I always like to break in and talk about things. You guys seem to enjoy this. So first, let's discuss the fugue state, right? Yes, fugue states do exist. Everything that surrounds this guy doesn't just happen. If you're in a fugue state, you're not going to be clean. You're going to be wandering around. Usually people found in fugue states are dirty, clothes torn, they're having issues. It's a mental health crisis type of deal. It could be yelling, screaming, all that stuff, attracting attention. You're probably going to get a lot of attention in a small town if you're in a fugue state. So it's just kind of difficult to think he could end up there. And then you've got the woman's accounts of the cows just disappearing, and then the cows beyond the fence just appearing over there, even though they shouldn't have been getting there. You've got, the government individuals coming down, talking to him if that's what happened at all. You've got a letter from Moscow trying to collect information. So the biggest thing that I always bring up in these videos, and if you've never seen my videos before, is a question to you. Let's say you're tasked with, on Earth, contacting uncontacted tribes, right? That's your thing. Or maybe you're just supposed to be studying them, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna go check out this tribe over here and see what they're doing. Well, you kind of have a magical cloak, we'll say, where nobody can see you. You walk into this village, and they're, building fires, smoking meat, just kind of standard, uncontacted tribe. They don't know about the technology of the world. They're just really, really deep in a jungle, basically. Like, that's it. It's basically an expression of human civilization 8,000 years ago. You're like, okay, well, cool. They seem to be having fun and a good time. I'm not going to mess with them. I'm just here to study, and then you move on, right? But then, one day, you're tasked with going into a deeper part of the jungle, and then you find a tribe there straight up building a steam engine. They're trying to get out there. They're like, hey, we just made this technology. We're going to go out there and see what the world's about, and yada, yada, yada. That tribe, you probably contact and say, hey, it's really cool you guys are building this. Here's the rest of the world. Since you're going to be coming out here anyways and doing these things, this is kind of how the world works. This is the technology we have. You've kind of reached a point where it's like, breaking that contact isn't infecting the tribe because they're going to get there anyways, right? Culturally, they're going to be fine and introduced to the rest of the world. Humanity is funny. I had somebody leave a comment on my main channel, Roanoke Gaming. If you didn't know, I have a main channel. Humanity, like this guy was like, oh, it's not impressive to split an atom. That guy's an idiot. Yes, it is. It is absolutely impressive to split an atom. That is not just something that you do, right? That's something that indicates an understanding of physics. That indicates atomic understanding as oh, hey, atoms exist. Even then, we got quarks. Then we have the quantum level. We're getting lower and lower and be like, okay, we understand more and more. To split an atom is to replicate something in nature that we have on this planet no ability, or we should have no ability to really do. The sun does it. And as far as, yes, atoms decay, but to actively split an atom to release that energy and to know it will release energy is an understanding of physics that no other animal on this planet has the capability of doing. And it really does highlight the difference between a species that may be, figuring out, hot air and steam move machine, right? That would be like an uncontacted tribe 8,000 years ago. Versus splitting an atom is like, oh, we just created a steam engine, and to the universe, that's going to look like, okay, this species is a little bit different in what they're doing. They now know how to split an atom. That goes beyond just societal levels. That's a deeper understanding with their minds able to conceptualize the world and the universe around them. That's like relativity. It's like that is going to denote something completely different for our species. So it's around that point, like aliens, at least the concept of aliens, have been something that has been discussed in other societies and possibly written about, but it almost seemed like they were just kind of like a passing interest, like, oh, here's a society that is forming, that's cool. And then we split the atom, and then all of a sudden, especially in the 50s and 60s, all of these alien sightings started like cropping up out of nowhere, right? I think if you were to ask me, not to be a conspiracy theorist or anything like that, blah, 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 but that's what this channel is based on, I think that's when a species really shows that it is capable of actually going beyond just what we essentially are, I guess is the best way to put it. When you split an atom, you basically send out a signal to the rest of, if there is anything out there, that you go well beyond just what normal animals are capable of, right? Fire isn't that big of a deal. While fire for our species is fantastic, keeps us warm, allows us to cook food, lightning striking a tree creates fire, right? But splitting an atom, nothing on this planet naturally does it. Atoms decay, but nothing intentionally splits it. So because of that, if you have something from this planet that is natural that then figures that out, that is a completely different ballgame, in which case, if there is an alien species out there, that's when they take notice of the species. And since then, you've had files released because the US is now releasing all these files about UAPs and UFOs and basically like interactions. It's undeniable at this point. It's not a conspiracy theory that there are things in the sky that we don't know what they are. It could be human technology from a different country, but the way that they move, our understanding of physics doesn't make sense for that thing to exist. So even if there is a country working on some top secret project, the reality is our understanding of space, or not just space flight, but flight in general, would tear apart our crafts if we're trying to do that. So that's not me being like, oh, I want to be, Mr. Conspiracy. That's an actual, those are files that have been released. Those are videos that have been released by the American government that show, yeah, we don't know what that is. And then you have the Black Knight satellite, which I mentioned prior. I'm interested to see if that ever gets released. So is there something else going on this planet? It's very possible. Again, if you kind of hold the idea that once we split the atom, all of a sudden everything maybe got more interesting for our species. At first it was sort of like, oh, they're kind of doing something. And then you straight up have aliens be like, oh my God, they detonated a nuke. It's like, yeah, that's gonna maybe radio back to the other superiors and be like, hey, we got a fledgling species here who figured out how to split the atom. Maybe we should tell them to chill out. Because the reality is, the fact that we didn't get into nuclear war with each other is in and of itself fairly strange. So I want to hear what you guys think about all this. If you enjoyed, then please leave a like. It's helping get the video out there. And subscribing is a great way to stay up to date when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Gaming channel, all that stuff in the description. And speaking of patrons, I like to thank mine real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Invictus Echo, Gradius, Monkey Man, Drake Von Lord, Scrungle. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness event tier, we have B. Malaga, Dragon Master Knight, Hope Blighton, and Need Extra Lives. At the first 10 accounts tier, we have Acidity. And at the second 10 accounts tier, we have Troy, Hendrick, and Pouches. And the rest of my patrons, I really do appreciate y'all's support as well. It goes a long way towards helping out, so thank you. All right, that's going to do it for me. Hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.